The cowboy returned after 10 years. After 10 long years, a cowboy finally returned to the town he once called home. The place was called Red Hollow, a small settlement surrounded by dry hills, dusty trails, and endless stretches of desert land. The wind always moved through the town like a quiet whisper, carrying sand, memories, and stories that people did not often speak about. No one expected him to come back. He arrived just before sunset, when the sky was painted in soft orange and gold. A lone horse stepped slowly into the town's main road. The sound of its hooves echoed between the wooden buildings. The cowboy sat tall in the saddle, wearing a worn hat that shaded most of his face. A long coat moved slightly with the wind, and dust clung to his boots like he had traveled through a long and difficult road. People noticed him immediately. A boy standing outside the general store stopped what he was doing. A woman carrying water paused near the well. Even the men sitting outside the saloon turned their heads slowly. There was something about the way this stranger entered the town. He did not look lost, but he also did not look like he belonged anymore. The cowboy did not speak. He did not ask for directions. He simply guided his horse forward, calm and steady, as if he already knew where he was going. But in truth, every corner of the town felt slightly unfamiliar to him now. 10 years was a long time. Buildings had changed. People had grown older. Some faces were gone completely, yet the air still carried the same feeling. Whispers slowly began to spread. "Who is he?" someone asked quietly. "Maybe a traveler," another replied. But an old man sitting near the barber shop narrowed his eyes and said nothing. He seemed to recognize something in the cowboy's posture, something from the past. The cowboy continued riding until he reached the center of the town. There he stopped. His horse lowered its head slightly, tired from the journey. The cowboy looked around slowly, taking everything in. The saloon stood on the left side, its swinging doors still creaking in the wind. The sheriff's office was across the street, unchanged but somehow heavier in appearance. The general store still had the same wooden sign, though the paint had faded. For a moment, he did not move. His hand rested lightly on the reins, but his eyes were distant. It was as if he was seeing not just the present town, but also memories layered over it. Another version of Red Hollow existed in his mind, the one from 10 years ago. Back then, the streets had felt more alive. Laughter used to come from the saloon at night. Children used to run near the water trough, and the ranch outside town used to be full of activity, horses and workers who trusted each other like family. But something had changed after he left. Or maybe it had started changing even before that. The cowboy slowly dismounted from his horse. His boots touched the ground, and a small cloud of dust rose around him. He stood still for a moment, adjusting his hat slightly. His face was now partly visible. It carried signs of long travel, sunburned skin, tired eyes, and a quiet seriousness that did not belong to a careless man. A few people from the town started to gather at a distance. They did not come close, but they watched carefully. In a small town like Red Hollow, strangers were noticed quickly, but familiar strangers were even more dangerous, because they brought questions no one wanted to answer. The cowboy began walking slowly down the main street. His movements were calm, but each step seemed heavy with meaning. He passed the saloon, where a piano was faintly playing inside. He passed the sheriff's office, where a lawman stood at the doorway watching him closely but not speaking. He passed a few familiar buildings that triggered memories he did not show on his face, but inside the past was waking up. 10 years ago he had left this town without saying goodbye. No explanation, no clear reason given to most people. Only a few knew parts of the truth, and even those pieces were incomplete. His departure had left behind confusion, anger, and unanswered questions. Some believed he had run away. Others thought he had betrayed someone. A few still believed he had died somewhere in the desert, and the man walking through town now was just a shadow of a story. But he was real, and he had come back for a reason. The cowboy stopped in front of an old wooden building at the end of the street. It was quieter here. The wind felt stronger. This place meant something to him, though he did not say what. He simply looked at it for a long time. Behind him, the town remained silent. No one yet knew what his return would bring. But one thing was certain. After 10 years of absence, the past had finally walked back into Red Hollow. After his silent return to Red Hollow, The cowboy did not rush to explain himself. He stayed quiet, moving through the town like a shadow from another time. People watched him closely, but no one dared to ask direct questions. In a small town, silence often spoke louder than words. He rented a small, old room above the general store. The room was simple, with a wooden bed, a small table, and a window that looked out toward the dusty main street. At night, he would sit by that window for long hours, staring at the quiet town. Sometimes the wind would shake the glass slightly, as if reminding him of things he had tried to forget. But the past does not stay buried for long. The next morning, as the sun rose over Red Hollow, the cowboy stepped outside. The air was cooler, and the town was slowly waking up. Smoke rose from chimneys. Doors creaked open. People began their daily work, but many still paused when they saw him. He walked without a clear direction at first. His boots carried him through familiar and unfamiliar streets at the same time. Every corner of the town seemed to trigger a memory. Some were soft, and some were painful. He passed the old schoolhouse. It looked smaller than he remembered. Then he walked by the blacksmith shop, where the sound of hammering echoed like before. Finally, he stopped near the edge of town, where a worn-out sign pointed toward the old ranch. His eyes became serious. That ranch had once been his life. Years ago, he worked there as a trusted hand. He was known for his strong work, calm nature, and loyalty. The ranch owner treated him like family, and the workers respected him deeply. It was a place filled with hard work but also trust. But something had gone wrong. 10 years ago, everything had changed suddenly. There had been tension between powerful land interests and the ranch owners. Decisions were being forced from outside. The cowboy had been caught in the middle of it. He knew something important was coming, something that could destroy everything they had built. And then, one night, he left. He never explained fully to the town why he disappeared. Only a few people knew that his departure was not simple. It was not a choice made out of weakness, but out of pressure and danger. Still, the truth had never reached everyone. Because of that, many believed he had abandoned them. As he stood near the edge of town now, he could feel that belief still hanging in the air. "Cowards don't return," he heard someone say softly behind him. He turned slightly but did not respond. The voice came from a man standing near a wagon. The man looked older now, but his eyes still held suspicion. The cowboy simply looked away and continued walking. He did not come back to argue. He came back because something unfinished still remained here. As he moved deeper into town again, he noticed how things had changed in the social life of Red Hollow. The ranch he once worked for was now struggling. Workers were fewer. The energy was gone. Even the land around it seemed less cared for. He stopped near the saloon later in the day. Inside, people were talking quietly, but the moment he entered, the room became almost silent. Some people looked away. Others stared directly at him, trying to remember or confirm who he was. An old man at the counter finally spoke. "You came back late," he said. The cowboy did not answer at first. He simply sat down slowly on a stool, placing his hat on the counter. "I did not have a choice before," he said in a calm voice. The old man studied him for a moment but did not reply. Outside, the wind moved through the streets again. Dust swirled gently, passing through empty spaces between buildings. It felt like the town itself was waiting for something to happen. Later that evening, the cowboy walked past familiar homes. Some windows were closed tightly, as if people were hiding behind them. Others remained open, but no one stood outside. He stopped once near a small house at the far end of town. He did not enter. He only looked at it for a long time. Something about that place held meaning for him, but he did not speak about it. After a while, he turned away and continued walking. Red Hollow was no longer the same town he had left behind, and he was no longer the same man who had once belonged to it. But even as the silence surrounded him, one truth slowly became clear. The past was not finished with him yet. The cowboy's return to Red Hollow slowly began to change the rhythm of the town. At first, people only watched him from a distance. They spoke in low voices when he passed by. Some still believed he did not belong there anymore. Others were simply curious, waiting to see what he would do next. But the cowboy did not act like a man trying to prove anything. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. Instead, he began to work quietly in the background, as if he was repairing something that only he could see. Each morning, he would leave his small room above the general store and walk toward the edge of town. His destination was always the same, the old ranch. The ranch had once been full of life. Now it looked tired and broken. The fences were damaged in many places. Some of the barns had weak roofs. The land itself looked less cared for, as if it had been slowly forgotten over the years. The current workers there were few. Some were young and inexperienced. Others were old and exhausted. They did what they could, but it was not enough. When the cowboy arrived on his first day at the ranch, no one welcomed him warmly. A few men stopped working and looked at him with doubt. "We don't need outsiders here," one of them said. The cowboy did not react strongly. He simply looked at the broken fence line and replied in a calm voice, "I am not an outsider." That was all he said. He picked up a hammer and started working. At first, people watched him carefully. They did not trust his actions. But as days passed, something began to change. The cowboy worked harder than anyone else. He repaired fences without being asked. He fixed broken tools. He helped guide horses back into order. He worked in silence, but his actions were steady and sure. Slowly, the workers began to notice something different about him. He did not complain. He did not stop. He did not act like he was better than anyone else. He simply worked. One of the younger workers, a boy no older than 18, watched him closely one afternoon. After some time, the boy finally spoke. "Why are you helping us?" he asked. The cowboy paused for a moment, then replied, "Because this place was never meant to fall apart." The boy did not fully understand, but he nodded anyway. As the days passed, the condition of the ranch slowly began to improve. It was not a sudden change. It was slow and steady. Broken parts were repaired one by one. The land began to look less abandoned. Even the workers started to feel more hopeful. But not everyone was happy about his return. In town, rumors continued to spread. Some people still believed the cowboy had returned for selfish reasons. Others thought he was trying to take control of something that did not belong to him anymore. At the saloon one evening, a group of men gathered and talked about him. "He left us once," one man said. "He will leave again." Another nodded. "People like him don't stay." These words slowly reached the cowboy, but he never responded to them. He had learned long ago that arguments do not change minds that are already fixed. Instead, he focused on what was in front of him. One afternoon, while working near the barn, he found an old wooden box hidden under broken boards. It was covered in dust and almost forgotten. When he opened it, he found old papers inside, records, agreements, and letters connected to the ranch. As he read them, his expression grew serious. The papers showed signs of pressure from outside forces. There were mentions of land deals, unfair demands, and decisions that were forced upon the ranch years ago. It was clear that something had been happening behind the scenes long before he left. This discovery confirmed what he had always suspected. His leaving 10 years ago was not just about fear or escape. It was connected to protecting something bigger than himself. At that time, he had chosen silence over explanation, believing it was the only way to keep certain things from getting worse. But now, the truth was starting to rise again. That evening, he sat alone outside the barn, holding the old papers in his hands. The sun was setting slowly, casting long shadows across the ranch. The wind moved gently through the fields. For the first time since his return, he felt the weight of everything clearly. He was not just repairing fences or fixing buildings. He was stepping back into a story that had never truly ended. And somewhere in the distance, Red Hollow itself seemed to wait, as if it knew that the most important part of the story was still about to begin. The discovery of the old documents changed everything for the cowboy. For days, he stayed quieter than before, thinking deeply about what he had found. The papers from the ranch were not just old records. They were proof that something unfair had happened years ago in Red Hollow. Deals had been made in secret, pressure had been placed on the ranch owners, and decisions had been forced that slowly destroyed what once was a strong and peaceful place. Now the cowboy understood why everything had fallen apart, and he also understood why he had been forced to leave 10 years ago. But understanding the truth did not make things easier. It only made the past feel heavier. He continued working at the ranch, but now his purpose felt clearer. He was not just repairing broken wood or fixing fences. He was trying to rebuild something that had been broken from the inside. One morning as he walked into town, he noticed that people were still watching him, but something had changed in their eyes. The suspicion was still there, but it was weaker now. In its place, there was curiosity, and in some faces, even respect. The cowboy did not speak much. He simply continued his routine. Work at the ranch, walk through town, stay quiet, observe everything. But the peace did not last long. One afternoon, a group of men arrived in Red Hollow. They were not from the town. Their clothes were clean and expensive, and their horses were strong. They carried themselves like men who were used to control and power. When they entered the town, the atmosphere changed immediately. People stopped talking. Doors closed slowly. Even the wind seemed quieter. The men went straight to the sheriff's office first, then began asking questions about the ranch. It became clear they were connected to the old land deals mentioned in the documents the cowboy had found. They had come back to claim what they believed still belonged to them. That evening, the cowboy stood outside the ranch, watching the horizon. He knew this moment would come sooner or later. The past had not only returned, it had brought its consequences with it. The next day, the men came to the ranch. "You are standing on land that doesn't belong to you," one of them said firmly. The workers looked nervous. Some stepped back, unsure of what to do. The cowboy stepped forward calmly. "This land belongs to the people who worked it and built it," he replied in a steady voice. The man smiled slightly, but it was not a friendly smile. "Paper says otherwise." For a moment, silence filled the air. The cowboy did not argue loudly. Instead, he took out the old documents he had found. He handed them to the sheriff, who had arrived after hearing the tension in town. The sheriff read them carefully. His expression slowly changed as he went through each page. "These records show pressure and unfair agreements," the sheriff finally said. "This needs to be reviewed properly." The visiting men did not like that answer. "This isn't finished," one of them said before turning away. They left the ranch, but their presence left a strong feeling behind. That night, the town of Red Hollow was restless. People talked quietly in homes and the saloon. Everyone knew that something important was happening, something that could change the future of the town. The cowboy sat alone outside the ranch that night. The stars were bright above him, but his mind was full of thoughts. He did not feel fear, but he felt responsibility. For 10 years he had stayed away, thinking distance would protect others from trouble. But now he realized that silence does not always protect, it sometimes allows problems to grow. The next morning, something unexpected happened. People from the town began arriving at the ranch. At first, it was only a few. Then more came. Workers, farmers, shopkeepers, people who had lived in Red Hollow for years. They did not speak much. They simply stood there, looking at the ranch, then at the cowboy. Finally, one of them spoke. "You stayed and worked when others walked away," he said. Another voice followed. "This land still matters to us." Slowly, more people began to support him, not because he asked for it, but because they had seen the truth with their own eyes. The cowboy did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply nodded. Because for him, this was never about winning anything. It was about fixing what had been broken. Days passed, and the situation slowly became more stable. The sheriff continued investigating the old documents. The outsiders did not return immediately, and the town of Red Hollow began to feel less divided than before. The ranch, once falling apart, started to feel alive again. Work continued. Hope returned. The land looked stronger, not just because of repairs, but because people cared again. One evening, as the sun set over Red Hollow, the cowboy stood at the edge of the ranch one last time. The wind moved gently across the fields. The sky turned orange and soft gold, just like the day he had returned. But this time, something was different. He was no longer just a man returning after 10 years. He was part of the place again. Not because the past was forgotten, but because it was finally understood. The cowboy looked out at the land quietly. Then he turned and walked back toward the town. For the first time in a long while, he did not feel like a stranger. He felt like he had finally come home.